Hi, I'm Chris Ketzley, Executive Director here at the Association of Towns. Talk of the Towns podcast is a production of the New York State Association of Towns and strives to bring the voices from across New York to talk about all things towns. If you're interested in participating as a guest, please email us at info@nytowns.org. The views and opinions expressed by podcast guests are of their own and do not necessarily reflect the views, positions, or policies of the New York State Association of Towns. Good afternoon and welcome back to another edition of Talk of the Towns, where we talk about all things important to our towns. And so thank you for joining us. And, as usual, I'd like to remind folks that you can find us on YouTube, you can listen on Spotify or Apple. And regardless of how you find us or how you watch or listen, please make sure to hit like, subscribe, and share. That's really important for us because it gets our rankings higher, and that's always good for getting the news out about the podcast. So welcome. We have a great show for you here today. We're going to be talking about battery storage facilities. We know this is an important issue for our members. We know that many of our members across the state are concerned about this and have enacted moratoriums to study and learn more about these before going forward. So we're going to dive into that with an expert very, very shortly. I just want to remind you again, if you're liking what you're watching, like, share, and subscribe. We appreciate it very, very much. And now I'd like to introduce our guest. Andrew Campanelli is here with us. Andrew is a practicing attorney for over 30 years. Representing municipalities across the nation, in fact, and working with municipalities on things like zoning ordinances, cell tower sightings, and all those types of things. So you have a lot of experience in this field. You've seen a lot. And Andrew, welcome and thank you for being here.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Before we get started, you want to maybe just talk a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself to the audience?
Well, nothing crazy. I've been a litigation attorney for over 30 years. For at least 2 decades, I've been providing guidance to local governments regarding their ability to regulate the use and structures that are built in properties in their jurisdiction, to strategically place things that might adversely impact surrounding properties and neighborhoods. So it's anything from cell towers to BESS facilities, things of that nature.
And so just so we define this, BESS facilities are battery energy storage. What's the last S?
Systems.
Systems, okay. Battery energy storage systems, otherwise known as facilities. These are popping up or at least attempting to. And there's a reason for it, right? We have a crisis in the state as far as having enough energy to meet all of our needs. And, I am not shy to say, I say this all the time, our energy crisis, I think, is by and large created by policy that's made right here across the street. And unfortunately, we are creating our own problem. And now we're coming up with solutions that are a little bit zany to try to fix our problems we created. But let's talk a little bit about, and we don't have to get deep into the energy market, but why are folks looking to site these BESS facilities now? Because we're trying to get data centers. Is that what's driving this? Like, there's not enough electricity or energy in this state to meet our needs?
Well, the theory with the battery energy storage systems is that they're going to work much like water towers. The theory is when you have low demand for energy, the plants then can store the energy. They can use the energy, pump it into these battery energy storage facilities, and then when there's periods of higher demand, the BESS facilities can then release that energy back to the system, the same way that a water tower works. Low periods of pressure demand for water, when people are sleeping at night, they pump water up into these towers. And then during the morning, when everybody gets in to take their shower, they open the valves in the tanks, they put pressure into the system, and you have enough pressure so that when you turn on your faucet, the water flows. The theory behind BESS facilities is pretty much the same.
So there is a purpose to them, that they do serve a purpose.
Yes.
But folks, obviously the first concern that a lot of towns have when they look at these proposals coming in, because it is new, are they dangerous? What is it that a town should be looking at in the siting process for one of these facilities?
Well, the reality is with the current technology, they are dangerous. There's no way to make them safe. They're taking lots of actions to make them safer, but they're not safe. These BESS facilities, 97% of which are based on lithium-ion batteries, are prone to fires and thermal runaway. Now, these are not your house fires, these are not gas fires. These are lithium battery fires, which are extremely dangerous for a host of reasons. Number one, if one battery in a facility ignites, it generally burns, it can reach temperatures of 1,000 to 1,300 degrees, which causes thermal runaway. Ignites adjacent batteries, and the next thing you know, you've got a fire that you could see flames from 16 miles away. And there are a host of factors that cause these fires. And it's virtually impossible to alleviate all of the causes. And the environmental damage and the danger to surrounding communities is just, it can't be overstated.
So, other than, I think you said there's no way to prevent these fires, right? Is there a way to extinguish these fires?
Well, generally, no, the fires have to burn themselves out. And so when you say there's no way to prevent them, all it takes is a single triggering event. Now, triggering events exist through the entire lifespan of a lithium-ion battery. It starts with the manufacturer. So in the process of the manufacture of the batteries, there can be a defect in the manufacture itself, or there can be contamination where medical particles get inside the battery, which can cause a short circuit. These are latent defects that you can't see. So they may not show themselves until the battery bursts into flames 6 months after it's been installed. Now that travels with the battery. So the battery is built in a manufacturing facility. Then it's transported to a warehouse or storage facility. Then it goes from there to the site. Then it's unloaded on the site. Then it's lifted and put into a building and installed. At any point in the process, any damage can occur. You can drop a battery which will crush internal components and you can't see it. It could be punctured. And all of those defects are latent. You can't see them. Now, when you think about a defect in a battery, you say, well, how often does that occur? You have to put this in perspective. The Moss Landing facility, which was the largest BESS facility in the entire United States, consisted of 100,000 lithium-ion battery modules. All it takes is one. If one ignites, the whole system can go up. And that's the problem.
I was going to ask you how big these facilities typically, well, first of all, how big is it? I'm thinking of a car battery. How big are these batteries?
Bigger than car batteries.
Okay.
I mean, these facilities are large, depending on the wattage they're seeking to produce. And then, of course, once they go on fire, they're a complete environmental disaster. You have thermal runaway. They go off and they can't be extinguished. You have to let them put themselves out. The fires generate their own oxygen. But worse than that, while they're burning, they emit highly toxinous gases. Hydrogen fluoride, hydrogen cyanide, carbon monoxide is the fourth I can't remember. And then you have the volatile organic compounds, benzene, styrene, and others. And then the metal particles, the heavy metals, cobalt, nickel, manganese, lithium. And so, for example, in the Moss Landing fire, which Moss Landing facility went on fire 3 times. The third time, it emitted a toxic plume of poisonous gases, which formed a cloud, which hovered over the adjacent bay. These are the dangers that come with these BESS facilities. And you really can't prevent them. You can try to minimize the likelihood of them occurring, but for as long as those batteries exist, the danger is ever present.
How long does a typical fire does it take for a fire to burn out itself out?
The fires can burn from hours to days. And very often what that results in is you have to have an evacuation of the surrounding area.
Wow. I mean, so it's dangerous, obviously, to the surrounding environment, people who live around it, but it's also, of all those things that you talked about being released, sounds as though, and I'm not a scientist, but sounds as though there's danger to long-term environment as well?
No question about it. There's a land trust which is in close proximity to the Moss Landing facility, and I think they encompass about 412 acres of environmentally sensitive properties. And once the Moss Landing fire eventually went out, it burned for a couple of days, they tested the ground in this environmentally sensitive area, and they found that the heavy metal contaminants were increased from anywhere from 10 times to 1,000 times pre-fire levels. And we're talking about nickel, cobalt, manganese, and lithium. How do you clean that up? 412 acres, how do you clean that up? You can't.
So these facilities are multiple acres
Yes.
facilities. And so these batteries, I guess I'm trying to get a visual on it, would sit inside maybe what would look like a warehouse? How are they housed?
Many of them are housed in container systems, so you'll see multiple containers. They look like Sealand containers. But even when they try to contain them, the fires burn so hot, they burn through whatever encasement systems they try to have. When you have a fire burning at 1,000 to 1,300 degrees, you're not stopping it. And if you try to seal it inside a container, the gases are explosive. And so instead, you turn it from a fire into an explosion. And sometimes we've had cases where firemen went in to try to extinguish it, and they were literally blown out of the system, sent to the intensive care unit.
Yeah. You mentioned this term thermal runaway. What is that?
Thermal runaway is a catastrophic failure where a battery ignites and burns so hot that it ignites the adjacent or nearby batteries. So it has a domino effect. And that's how these things just expand. And as I said, the Moss Landing, which is the biggest facility, the flames are visible from 16 miles away, according to the local newspapers.
Now, Moss Landing, is that the one down in Hudson Valley?
That's the one in California.
Oh, in California, okay. Because there was a fire down in the Hudson Valley somewhere.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Summer of 2023 in New York, we had the environmental barbecue. 3 months, 3 BESS fires, May, June, and July. Yeah, that one, Warwick, East Hampton, and Lyme.
So across New York, you know how many of these systems are out there right now already built?
I don't really know.
Okay.
They're all different sizes, and nobody's really reporting that accurately.
I was going to say, I don't have a good handle on that myself. I haven't heard that. I know there's been a lot of proposals, and as I mentioned earlier, a lot of towns have enacted moratoriums, I think rightfully so, to take time to learn more about this. But as you say, this is a danger that really can't be prevented or mitigated against. But yet there's a need here, as you mentioned, this kind of, putting energy into the system when it's needed, storing it when it's a slower time. Obviously, this summer's coming up. I saw that there's a 63% chance of us being in a super El Nino, which means we're going to have a very hot, dry, sunny summer, according to this meteorologist prediction. Super El Nino. So we could be seeing some issues this summer with making sure we're meeting the demands of cooling attempts and all that. Are there any other less dangerous technologies out there? Is there any other alternatives to BESS?
Yes. Well, technically, I think they'd still be a BESS, but the best alternative, although it's still being developed, are the sodium-ion batteries instead of lithium-ion batteries. Sodium is much cheaper than the lithium, but more importantly, it has a dramatically lower level of risk with regard to thermal runaway, and dramatically lower risk of catastrophic failures. But the industry won't use sodium-ion batteries instead of lithium-ion batteries for a number of reasons. First is the energy density, which is the amount of energy a battery can store relative to its weight. The energy of a lithium-ion battery is 100 to 300 watts per kilogram. For a sodium-ion battery, it's 100 to 160 watts per kilogram. Second is the lifespan. Lithium-ion batteries have a longer lifespan than sodium-ion batteries. I'm talking about grid-level batteries. So lifespan of batteries are measured in cycles, fully discharged versus fully charged. One can expect a grid-level lithium-ion battery to last basically 8 to 10,000 cycles, whereas a sodium-ion battery is likely to last maybe 5,000 cycles. And then finally, with regard to lithium-ion batteries, you have an established supply chain, so they can get them. Everything's set up. For sodium-ion batteries, they have to establish a new supply chain, which would take time.
So how do you define cycles? I mean, we get a sense that 8,000 is obviously more than 5,000, but what's a cycle?
Well, theoretically, it's a fully charged and a fully discharged. So every time it fills up with energy and then discharges the energy, argue that's a cycle.
So that could be in one day? Like it could fill up overnight and be used during the day?
In theory.
Yeah, but it doesn't happen every day.
Right.
So you're not talking about 8,000 days necessarily. You're just however often that is going to need to happen. Is this something that is more in use, obviously, in the summer months than it would be in the winter months, right? Because people aren't using electricity in the winter as much as they use in the summer, because yet we still have natural gas furnaces and all of that. Do you see a difference in energy use between those seasons? Is one higher than the other?
Generally speaking, but that's going to evolve. I mean, the state of New York is trying to shy people away from using fossil fuels to heat their homes. If everything goes electric, the demand on the grid is just going to get worse.
You're very kind to use the word shy away. And I don't know if I call it shy away, but
I try to stay out of politics.
So we've already established that towns are getting all sorts of proposals now, right? And we've talked a little bit about how the moratoriums are in place so they can study it more and whatnot. But short of that, what can towns do to protect themselves from these types of projects?
Any responsible town official must do three things. It's critical. The first is towns must remain vigilant and oppose the enactment of current pending legislation to try to strip all local zoning authority over BESS facilities. There are bills pending in the Senate and the Assembly where they want to give full power over the placement of BESS facilities to ORs. So towns would have absolutely no say. And one of the last ones I worked on, they wanted to put a BESS facility 200 feet from residential homes in a cul-de-sac. You have to be out of your mind to want to do that. So towns must remain vigilant to make sure that they oppose that type of legislation. Second, if and to the extent that they remain vested with the power to regulate the placement of these facilities, they should adopt provisions in their local zoning ordinances to prevent the irresponsible placement of these facilities. And third, and perhaps most important of all, if and when a BESS facility is built in your town, you must put in place an evacuation procedure and policy. Because very often when there's a fire at one of these things, sometimes they happen at 3 o'clock in the morning. Now, maybe that somebody's asleep at the switch and they're not watching the heating or cooling system, or for whatever reason, next thing you know, you've got a BESS fire at 3 o'clock in the morning. And now this thing is emitting hydrogen cyanide into your neighborhood. And so somebody has to figure out, number one, is this a fire that's going to require an evacuation? And what area is going to get evacuated? Well, maybe on the evening in question, the wind is blowing from north to south at 20 miles an hour. So maybe you say, okay, you have to evacuate 1 mile of the homes to the north of the facility and 2 miles to the south. Who's going to make that determination? Right. Then, who's going to notify all the homeowners? Listen, you have to get your family, your entire family, all your pets, get out of the house, and you're going to be out for a couple of days while this thing burns itself out. And then finally, where are you going to send them? Are you going to set up an evacuation center in advance? Maybe a high school, whatever. But you should have in place this plan in the event a BESS facility happens, because statistically, once a month, the BESS facility goes on fire. You can set your calendar by it.
Right. So those are critical pieces of advice from Andrew. Number one is stay vigilant against, and you hit a nerve for me, vigilant against any encroachment on home rule and local zoning, and we'll delve into that in just a moment. Number two, be proactive and have a zoning law that deals with this, and make sure they're in places that are most appropriate in your town, not in a residential area certainly, but maybe at least industrial or something like that. And then number three is to have a safety plan, which would probably require a lot of work coordinating with local police and fire and EMS and all this other type of stuff, maybe county management, office of emergency services. So make sure all of those things are being done. But in particular, as you all know, we at the association are firmly and strongly rooted in home rule and want to make sure that we oppose anything that would come into conflict with that. And Andrew, I think the bills, we talked about this. A couple things I'm going to ask you to do just for our audience. We'll talk about the bills in a moment, but they would essentially move zoning authority from the local government, from the community, to either ORES or people pronounce it differently. Can you explain what ORES is first, and just so people understand? I think it stands for Office of Renewable Energy.
And let me just pull it. And the siting of electric transmission.
Yeah, it's a long one.
So ORS initially was formulated or created to regulate the installation of power plants. Power plants are exempt from local zoning authority. They can put them anywhere they want. And so the push has been to change the definition of a power plant to include not just power producing facilities, but also power storage facilities. And so it would literally strip local towns of all zoning authority over BESS facilities. So if someone wanted to build a BESS facility in your town, they just have to go to ORS. Yep. Now the chairman of ORS was handpicked by our illustrious governor among many reasons. The most important reason is that he is forward thinking in terms of he, like she, wants to install thousands of BESS facilities across the state.
And ORS or ORES, however you say it, already now has solar facilities that go there if they're of a certain size. I think it's 25 megawatts, maybe. I don't know.
Something like that.
Something like that. But already, so you have power plants, you have certain solar facilities, and now these BESS facilities would be included in that as well. There's two bills that we identified. One is Senate 5506. That's Senate 5506. The other is Assembly 8378. They are not companion bills. They're two different bills. So it's not a same as situation there. 5506 in the Senate, 8378 in the Assembly. And as you say, Andrew, these would really strip local zoning and really the community's right to determine what they want in their community and what kind of risks they want to take and whatnot. The problem we have here is the state will say, well, this is of a state concern, right? Our lack of energy, our lack of ability to get electricity in particular where it needs to go is an issue of state concern. But I think locals would say our community, our safety and health and wellness and vibrancy of our community is a community issue. How do we fight that?
Grassroots support. You have to remain vigilant. I mean, unfortunately, if this passes and ORS is vested with the exclusive power to approve the siting of these things, it would be a complete disaster for towns and people that live in towns. The companies that want to install these things don't necessarily look for the least intrusive and most responsible sites for these facilities. Sometimes the choice of location is based upon access to the grid.
Yeah.
You know, there's a whole process. Once these things are built, there's a process by which they get hooked up to the grid. And so they want to find the best location to get hooked into the grid for the lowest cost. And there's a non-for-profit corporation which oversees the connection to the grid and the process and the application fees, which are based in part in how much it costs to upgrade the grid to handle all these things. Yeah. But if the best place to hook it into the grid happens to be right next door to a residential neighborhood with 100 homes, guess where they're going to put it? And it's a disaster for towns, an absolute disaster.
So make sure you're talking with your local assembly member, your senator, call the governor's office, let them know how you feel about these two bills, Senate 5506, Assembly 8378. Let's make sure we defend home rule. Let's make sure that communities have the say in what goes in their community. We don't have an opinion on the actual facility itself. We don't have energy policy opinions as far as the association is concerned. But certainly any time that these are proposed within local communities, it should be the control of the local government in that, I believe. Anything else, Andrew, that we've missed, we haven't hit on yet? I know that we've touched on technology not really being where it needs to be. And it feels like, to me, this is a little bit of a rush. Like, okay, we have these lithium batteries, let's do this. But there's other things in the queue, sodium maybe there's other things coming down the line. I think one of the issues we have here in the state is that policymakers don't really give the market a chance to evolve. They try to force it. They try to say, this is what we want, so let's do it. And it doesn't work. And I think we're seeing that with the rollback of these climate goals. Anything that you see out there that's coming down the line that might be a new technology that'd be safer, better, more efficient besides the sodium?
I don't. I think that the sodium will improve as it gets developed. The biggest problem I have is the misinformation that, oh yeah, these BESS facilities are safe now because we have all these new safeguards, and there's a whole industry of quote unquote experts. You know, sometimes a retired fireman says, I know how to make these things safe, and they're not. Yeah. Because, you know, normally you think of a situation where, let's say the Warwick facility goes on fire. And normally if there's a fire, what you do is you examine what caused the fire, you fix it so it doesn't happen again. Well, the evidence that they're not safe is borne out by the fact that the Warwick facility went on fire not once, not twice, but 3 times. And this was an isolated incident. The same is true of the Moss Landing facility. Now, the Moss Landing facility was built under the most stringent safety regulations in the world. It's no secret that California is the most overregulated state. And when it comes to safety and environment, they're off the charts. And even with the most stringent safety regulations in place in the world, they couldn't stop this facility from going on fire, not once, not twice, but 3 times. That is why I say they're not safe. They haven't figured out how to make them safe yet. The technology is not there.
So once you site it, we talk about solar. I meant to ask this question earlier. We talk about solar fields, and we know they last 20 years or 30 years, and then you have to decommission them. Is the same thing with the BESS? I mean, do they have a certain lifespan, and then you have to?
They do, and that's the next stage of the environmental nightmare. What do you do with the batteries?
Yeah.
The cost to recycle them is tremendous, and not only that, even when you recycle them, the recycling process, it's very difficult to have a recycling process that does not emit pollution into the environment. You talk about nickel, cobalt, manganese, lithium, and it's much, much cheaper to just dump them into a landfill, which is a whole nother nightmare. So, and of course, the sodium-ion batteries would have a much less adverse impact on the environment. But it is a disaster from every aspect of environmental analysis.
Yeah, it certainly is a vexing issue. This for us. There's no question about it. Making sure we keep up with our energy needs. Obviously, with these data centers coming, obviously this is something that's going to continue to be a challenge for our local governments and our local communities. But we have to stay vigilant. We have to do what's best for our community. And any last comments or concerns you want to share?
Well, I'm fiercely loyal to my municipal clients, so I kind of have an affection for towns. But one thing remains true in my mind, and is that towns are in the best position to protect their citizenry and their communities. They know their town. The people here in Albany, they draft legislation, great, but they're not in the best position to know the best place to put a BESS facility. Towns know the areas. They know their zoning districts. They know their topography, their population density. If a BESS facility comes in, the town would know the best place to put it. And to have a state agency ram them down their throat in the most convenient location for hooking up to the grid is a disaster from my perspective.
Yeah, absolutely, and we appreciate your affinity for towns. We certainly share that. Is there a contact information you want to give if someone wants to call you or email you for more information?
Sure. Well, someone can find me at my website, which is campanellipc.com, and my phone number is 516-746-1600.
Andrew, I want to thank you for being here today. You've shined a light on a very important topic. It's controversial. I know we get a lot of calls from battery storage operators who want to talk with us, and we're open to learn more. Always open to learn more and have that conversation with them. I was supposed to tour 1 or 2 down in Brooklyn, but it got canceled and then it never got rescheduled. I am curious to tour 1 or 2, but we appreciate your vigilance and all your work you do on behalf of towns. It's important. Like I say, we don't comment as much on the policy as we do on the fact that communities need to maintain home rule. They need to maintain that they have the best, as you say, position to determine where these are. So, for towns, one thing is be a little more proactive and start thinking about where, if we have to have them, where do they go? It's like it's like solar fields, right? We did the same thing. We try to make sure they're in areas that need to be redeveloped or whatnot. The challenge is, as you said earlier, is where you hook into the grid. And is there any way around that? Is there any way to make these BESS facilities, wherever they go, have to pay for a substation or a transmission hookup or whatever it is? I don't know exactly what it is, but can the town say, okay, if you want to go in this industrial park, for example, but there's no hookup, can we put it on BESS, the operator, the developer, to pay to have that put there?
Well, the system does actually kind of work that way.
Okay.
Because what happens is the non-for-profit entity that oversees the hookup into the grid has a process. If someone wants to build a BESS facility, they have to apply for hookup permission, I'll call it. And they have to pay a fee. Now, to assess what the fee will be, the entity that controls that hookup assesses how many applications have been filed and the size of each proposed facility. They then figure out what it's going to cost to upgrade the grid to accept those hookups. They then divide the overall expense between the applicants in proportion to the size of their proposed facility. So in a certain sense, they do bear the expense in relation to the size of each facility.
Okay. I think that, that's fair. I don't like to see where someone comes in and is like, okay, well, this is most convenient for me because it's next to a residential neighborhood, so let's go there. I think the town should have the ability to say, no, you have to go out here and you're gonna have to pay to have that hookup out there just because it's cheaper for you there is not, it's not the best choice sometimes.
Absolutely.
So before we wrap up, I just want to go back because you've talked about the fires and how important they are, to be aware of how dangerous they are actually. What are some of the causes of these fires? Like what would cause, you mentioned a couple times that each facility caught on fire 3 times. Is there something going on there? What's causing these fires?
So there are a multitude of triggering events, which are ever present as long as a battery exists and is operating. Even when they're not charging or discharging, there are events which can cause the fires. One of the most common ones is overcharging or discharging. If they attempt to overcharge them, that can cause a fire. Short circuits can be common. Now, short circuits can be internal or external. If you have metal particles inside the battery, that can cause a short circuit. Or outside in the facility itself, there can be a short circuit. Anytime there's a short circuit, that bypass circuit dumps energy by creating heat, and that can cause a fire. Physical damage to the batteries, of course. Anytime there's a crack, even if you drop it and you don't see something externally, it could be internal, it could have crushed a component. That causes fires. And then, of course, you can even have overheating from external sources. If something else heats up too close to the battery goes up. And then the spreading is just, there are a multitude of factors. There was a recent fire where it was a multi-level facility. Batteries on the top floor went on fire. They activated the fire suppression system with water to try to keep it down. There were cracks in the floor. The water went through the cracks in the floor, caused the short and the lower level, set the lower level up.
Wow.
So the factories are ever present. And the worst part is, as the batteries degrade over time, the risk goes up, not down.
And we might have covered this. How long does it take for it to degrade?
It depends upon the use and the conditions,
That's right, the
temperatures.
cycles.
There's a host of factors.
Yeah.
But the fact is, the triggering factors exist every second of every minute of every day. And it can happen at any time.
Well, I appreciate you being here. This is an important issue, as I mentioned before. Thank you so much. And folks, if you want more information on these, Andrew shared his contact information earlier. Please feel free to reach out. And thank you, Andrew, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.